Hello, I'm glad you're here. This is Jennifer McGuire. Once again, I apologize if the sound isn't just right, but I am out of town and I wanted to make sure to be able to share this video with you. So today I'm sharing with you several fun ways to use vellum on your cards. I love to do videos on vellum because I think it's a great product that's inexpensive and can be used in so many ways. And I do have some plans for some other ideas that I'll share in a video soon. Another great thing about vellum is most crafters have it, so I hope you can try this with products you have in your stash. Okay, let's jump in with my first card. On the background here, we have some delicate vellum that I have a few tricks to share. All right, the product I'll be using on this is the Altenew chocolate flowers. This is a new bundle that is fantastic. There are layering stencils and then a coordinating die. These can be used in so many fun ways, and I'll talk about a few of those as we go. Now what I'm choosing to do today is to do the stenciling and then we'll do some die cutting. So I have my Altenew Ultra Sticky Mat down. I have a piece of white cardstock and I'll place the first stencil in place. I am using Altenew Fresh Dye Inks today. I'm putting the color family name on the screen if you wanted to check them out. These are all new fresh dye inks that they've just come out with. So their fresh dye ink families are fun because there's light, medium, dark, extra dark, and that way you can easily choose colors that work well together. But keep in mind, they can be sold, or they are sold separately, so you can just pick and choose if you're interested. But you could do today's technique with whatever inks you may have. Next up, I have an Altenew large blending brush. It's my favorite brush to apply ink when I want to put down color very quickly or do a bold background. It's very great for blending, but then I move on to the mini ink blending tool, which is smaller, my favorite smaller brush, so that I could put darker color towards the center of these flowers. This blue color family is such a beauty, and I just love how bright and vibrant the colors are. Now I'm moving on to stencil 2, and the stencil actually has etched outlines that you line up with the inking you've already done. So I'm able to easily line this up because the etched lines line up with the blue flowers I've already put down. Each of these stencils has that feature with the etched lines, so it really makes it foolproof to get them lined up just right. Now this time I'm going in with the same blue color family, but the lighter shades. And then I'm using my smaller brush so I can selectively color this. So I can do different areas, blue, green, and even bring in some of those yellows. I do like to come in with a darker color and put it towards the center of the flowers, which I mentioned before. But then also on the leaves, I like to do a darker shading towards the base of the leaves or the center stem of the leaves. Now we're on to the next stencil, and over this one I covered it completely with the lighter color bamboo ink, and you can see I'm using the large blending brush for that. Then I come in with the smaller blending brush to add a little bit of darker shading towards the center of those leaves, just to add a little variation, but you definitely could just do one color over the whole thing if you want to save some time. But look how beautiful that background is so far. Now let's come in with the next leaf. This does some of the flower centers and also some of the little flowers around the background. And I will use my darkest blue color and then a lighter yellow and some medium yellows for the rest of the little flowers. And look at this beautiful background. You could definitely leave it as is and use this as a card background, but I wanted to show you 3 ways you could use the coordinating die to cut those flowers out without a white trim around the edge. The first thing you could do is just look through the openings and line it up the best you can. That definitely would work if you get it just right, but I don't want to mess up these beautiful flowers at this point. So I'm going to show you another way you can do this. Take a piece of thin scrap paper, maybe a thin cardstock, just a scrap, run it through, and look at that beautiful die cut. You could use that as a fun background too. What I'm going to do is use that extra die cut to line up with the inking we've already done. So I'll lay it right on top of our inked background. So you can easily see through those holes to get it lined up. Then I will take the die and put that on top and make sure the die pops into the openings like a puzzle piece. Now when I run this through my die cut machine, it likely won't cut all the way through because we have that extra die cut in there. So you will get this little impression, but look how cool that is. You could leave it as is, and that makes more interesting background. But what I'm going to do is pop the die back into those little grooves to the impression that we've made, run it through them one more time, and that will cut all the way through. And look at how it cut these out beautifully. No white trim, bold color, ready to put together on a card however we wish. All right, let me show you another way you could do this. And this involves making an impression with the die before you stencil, and it helps you to line up the die after. So I have my Spellbinders die cut machine here, along with the flexible embossing mat. Most machines come with one of these. I'm putting my cardstock on the flexible mat, my die onto that, and then I'll run it through. I'm following the sandwich that the die cut machine recommends for making an impression or embossing with a die. Now, when I take this out, you'll see I've made an impression of those flowers, and this looks cool as is, right? But what I can now do is use that impression to line up my stencils every time. So I can easily see through the stencil openings to line up with that impression that we made with the die. Then I can do all of the stenciling kind of like I did before. I did more of the blues and the greens and the yellows, and each time I just line up with that impression. Then, once I'm done with all of that inking, I can take the die and pop it into the impression. It kind of locks in place like a puzzle piece, and run it through my die cut machine. And that way I know that my die will line up with the inking that we've done. Or you could leave it like this. This would be a great card background with that texture and bold color. But here we'll line up that die and this will cut it out beautifully. So those are a few different options for getting this die to line up nicely with the stenciling you've done, but it's really not hard to do, and you end up with an outline that you can use for another project and all of these beautiful inked floral die cuts. Okay, now let's do the vellum technique for the background here. I really like this delicate look. It looks even better in real life. To create that, I'm using the Altenew piped waffle die. This is a great border die that really creates just a fun textured looking background. I'm cutting it twice from vellum, and you could use absolutely any vellum you may have to do so. I'm putting these onto my Altenew grip mat. It just kind of holds it in place and keeps me from kind of folding or damaging my vellum, my delicate vellum die cut here, as I ink over it. I am gently applying a heavy amount of ink to it, so I color my vellum. So you can make your vellum whatever color you want. I find this works best with dye ink, and the color will appear lighter on the vellum than it would on white cardstock, so keep that in mind as you choose your color. You can also ink both sides to make it a little more vibrant. Now the key to this is to heat set it afterwards. You will see that the ink is not dry on the vellum. It doesn't really want to absorb it. It'll have a shine. You just need to heat set it until that shine is gone and it becomes matte. And you can see the soft color vellum that we now have. Now I did the two so that it will fit nicely onto the front of an A2 card base. Now to add this onto my card base, I am using die cuts that have adhesive on the back and putting it on top of the vellum, and that's what's going to hold it onto my project. So I'm taking the two vellum die cuts and just temporarily taping it to my work surface and to the card base so they stay put as I add things on top. Now the sentiment that I'm using is the Altenew Garden Bouquet stamp set. There is a coordinating die set available, and I really liked that thank you, the friend, and the with love. So I decided to use all three on this card. I stamped them with black ink on white cardstock and cut them out with the coordinating die, and added two die cuts to the back of each so it has some strong dimension. So I'm starting out by placing the three sentiments onto the background, figuring out where I want them to be. I wonder why I don't do multiple sentiments like this on a card, and I thought it would be fun to give it a try. So I put two foam squares on the back of each of those, and I'm placing it right on top of the vellum. Now I don't have to worry about this getting crushed in the mail because I did extra die cuts behind these sentiments so they're strong. It'll hold up even with those little pieces of foam tape behind it. Once I have those three in place, you can see I'm starting to hold my vellum die cuts in place. Now I can tuck in all of my little flowers and leaves. Now I'm using liquid adhesive to add these because I know it's strong, it'll hold the vellum behind it, and it gives me some wiggle room time. After I got all my flowers and leaves arranged, I can peel off that temporary tape and we have our card front. Now you can see the vellum is kind of hanging off the edges. You could definitely leave that. I think it's kind of fun. But I also am putting just a tiny dot of liquid adhesive along some of the edges. Now this is going to keep them from getting peeled up too much, but I'll be honest, I like when vellum isn't completely adhered because I like that it kind of curls up and it kind of makes this wispy look that I think is really special about vellum. If you wanted your vellum to be completely stuck down, you could have put double-sided adhesive on the back of the vellum before you die cut it, but then you really lose the feel of vellum. So I was just sure to tack down a little bit of those loose ends, but not all of them. So you can see some ends are still curling up, which gives a really fun feel. I did finish off the card by adding some Altenew gold gemstones to the center of the flowers. I really like how these are faceted and offer a lot of shine. Here's the completed card. You can see the soft vellum in the background. I think it just adds a lot of interest. You could do this with really any die cuts in vellum, and I really feel the less you attach it to the background, the better the results are. In fact, I didn't have to tack any around the edges. I could have just left as is. It would have flattened nicely in an envelope and really looked lovely when it came out of the envelope. And the 3 sentiments, I think that's fun. I'll definitely have to try that again in the future. Next up, I have 2 cards using the same product, and each shows a different way to use vellum. I first will do some die cutting of colored cardstock. I'm using a new line of colored cardstock from Altenew. They have 23 colors, and these colors match inks that they have. So like there's Buttercream, which matches one of my favorite yellow inks. Here we have Volcano Lake and Lagoon, which are 2 other of my favorite colors of ink, and they really are a very true match. There are 23 colors, and I bet money they're adding more to their collection. I'll show you all of the cardstock swatches that I made, and you can hit pause if you want to get a closer look at the names of each of these colors. Now, I really like that Morning Frost. It's a nice warm gray, and there are a few other unique colors in here, like that Sapphire is very unique, and then one that is really standing out to me is the Winter Lake, which is kind of like a light denim blue. It's beautiful. Caribbean Sky is one of my favorite blue colors from Altenew, and the cardstock is gorgeous. I mentioned earlier, 2 of my absolute must-haves are Lagoon and Volcano Lake. If you like teals as much as I do, I have many teal cardstocks, but these are a little different from any others that I have. They're a little more muted, gorgeous. As for greens, I really like the greens here. These 3 look great together, especially the Bamboo and the Parrot. Now the Bamboo and Parrot are kind of a happy, lighter green, not too lime, not too Kelly green, just right there in the middle. And what's cool is some of these cardstocks, like the Parrot, the back side is a little bit of a different shade than the front side. Even though it's a solid through green cardstock, the 2 sides are a little different, and that's fun because you can get more from it. So you can do fun layering. It's hard to see in the video. It's very subtle, but one is slightly darker than the other. I only noticed this with a few of these Altenew cardstocks, but I think it's a fun feature. Here you can see the warm sunshine. The front and the back are slightly different again, but this is true yellow all the way through. It's not like a white core cardstock. I also really like the rouge color and the crimson. The crimson's like a bright light red, really fun and matches great with their inks. So I'm going to use some of those colors of cardstock for the flowers that I'm creating using this new flower vine die set from Altenew. Now this is a really creative die set. It has 1 leaf layer, and then there are 2 different options for the type of flowers you add to the leaf. And there is a keyhole system, so it takes the guesswork out of lining them up. So I'll show you how they line up in a moment. So you can see here on my sticky mat, I have 2 of the leaf clusters, one on the top, one on the bottom. Then on the top, we have those peach color flowers. Those will layer together, give 1 look. On the bottom, I have those teal color flowers. Those will layer together to give another look. So you can get 2 different looks from 1 die set. I'm adding a bit of shading to these die cuts using the matching ink. So that's Volcano Lake cardstock that I used for those flowers on the bottom, and I added shading with the Volcano Lake ink. So it'll be very subtle. If I wanted to make it more dramatic, I could choose a darker color. Here I also have the Parrot ink, and let me do a comparison to show you just how close these inks are to the cardstock. I did a little swipe of the ink onto white cardstock there, and holding the colored cardstock up to it, you can see it's a very close match. I really appreciate it when I have an ink and a cardstock that match so well because it takes a lot of the guesswork out and saves me some time. Now it's time for my favorite part, and that is the keyhole system. Now, if you look at these little round pieces on the die cuts, there is a shape die cut into it. That's the keyhole system. So that top one is actually a keyhole shape. So I put glue on that, and then I find the flower that has the keyhole shape in the center, and I line up that little keyhole hole, and I know I've positioned it just right. So the next one there, I think it's a little arrow. I'll put glue on that. Then I'll find the flower with the little arrow at the center and line up the arrows. And I do that with the other three shapes. And this way I know exactly where these will line up nicely, takes the guesswork out of it. Altenew has had this keyhole system for some time now and is using it more and more in their layering die cuts. And I think it is one of the most brilliant things I've seen in card making. Makes things so easy. So that's how you assemble this one flower. So this is one of the options that you can create with the set. And then to cover up that keyhole or those little holes, there is a die that creates these little circles. So the little flower centers, and that covers it up, and no one ever knows you use that system, and it just makes it beautiful. All right, now the other one you can line up the same way. So you look for the little shapes to line up the same shapes, but when you layer these on top, you get a completely different flower type on the leaves. So two different looks from one die set, and I just think that's wonderful, and I'm hoping that Altenew comes out with more like this. Now here I'm putting the next layer on this. This is the crimson cardstock and the rouge cardstock together, and I just love those two. They make a nice match. Now that we have our bouquets, let's start with this card. I actually created two bouquets for this one, but let's work on that vellum note card. So I have a piece of vellum here, and I scored it right down the center at 5.5 inches, and now I'm folding it there. Vellum folds very nicely and is great for card base, as long as you give some support to it or use a heavier weight vellum. I'm using Altenew vellum today. Now I cut that in half at 4.25 inches, and now we have two top folding vellum note cards, and I'll use one for this card. You'll see, as I mentioned, I created two of these teal colored flower arrangements. One will go on the top and one will go on the bottom, and it fits perfectly. Let's add some interest to that vellum note card. I'm opening the note card up and putting the front of the note card right into the corner of my scoreboard. I can't find my Altenew scoreboard, so I grabbed one of my older ones, but you could use whatever scoreboard you want. I'm using the Altenew Scoreboard Stylus tool that comes with it. This is great for scoring on vellum or doing score lines on vellum, but you could use a bone folder also. I started by putting a score line every 1/4 inch, which creates a fun stripe pattern on the vellum. But then I decided to go back and do it every 1/8 inch, just so I can have more stripes to it. And so basically I'm running my stylus along every groove of the scoreboard and scoring from the edge of the cardstock all the way to the fold line. You can see I'm holding my cardstock in place so it doesn't shift, and it will start to curl. See how it's starting to curl there? That's okay. That will get fixed later on. Just keep going. Now when I got to the end here, it was kind of hard to hold it with my fingers. So I actually got that really strong magnet that I use with my glass magnetic work surface. My glass magnetic work surface is from Glassboard Studio, and they have some giant magnets that are super strong and great for holding things in place. In fact, it's so strong that it'll hold this in place through that scoreboard. So now I'm going all the way up to the edge of this side, and we have all these 1/8 inch spaced score lines, which gives a striped look to the front of our vellum note card. By the way, if you're interested in the glass magnetic work surface and that magnet, I have links down below with a discount code for 20% off. All right, so there you can see those fun score lines. I love the white line effect you get when you score on vellum. All right, so now I'll fold this in half. You'll see it's still kind of curling. Don't worry, we'll be able to flatten that out in the end. And remember, your cards do go in an envelope for some time when they go through the mail, so it'll flatten out anyway. Now I can add the two floral arrangements, allowing them to meet closely in the center. And I'm using liquid adhesive for this, so I'll put something heavy on it while it dries. While it dries, I'll create a mini note card to go in this inside. This is that lagoon color from Altenew. Goodness, it's beautiful. I folded a piece of that cardstock and I cut it down to be 3.5 by 4 3/4 inches. So it's a little mini note card. I'm matting it onto a piece of white cardstock that's slightly bigger. I'll put adhesive on the back of that and place that on the inside of our vellum note card. Because I have a mini note card here on the inside, my personal message will not show through the front of that see-through note card. I then cut another piece of white cardstock to the same size as the last one we used, and I'll glue this to the back of the note card. This covers up that adhesive and also gives you a place to write or stamp your hand stamped by Jennifer image. I'm also adding some Altenew white enamel dots. They have this great pack of white and black enamel dots. I like these because they're not too bulky, there's different sizes, and there are hearts and stars. Now for a sentiment, I thought I would use the Thinking of You from the Altenew Lovely Rose Peony. I wasn't really sure at first. I loved that Thinking of You, but I thought I needed something bigger. But I wanted to show you this set. This is a new bundle, and it has a vase and a large image, a large floral image. And look how beautiful the stencils color those in. The reason I like this is a vase is included, and that vase would be good with a lot of floral images you may have. It'd be cool to do a white heat embossed vase on vellum and then do a floral image on top. Great set. Didn't get a chance to use it today, but wanted to share it with you. I did, however, take another sentiment from that stamp set, and I want to stamp that on the inside mini note card. So I have my card closed in my stamping tool here. I'm lining up that sentiment on top of the Sending Hugs that's on the outside. Then I'll open up my card and stamp the sentiment on the inside. Because I lined it up with the sentiment on the outside, when this card is closed, you won't see this inside sentiment through the vellum. So that's a little trick to making sure things line up nicely. Let's look at the completed card. You can see it stands up nicely on display. There's a little bit of a curl to that scored vellum still, but it'll flatten up in the mail, and it really is gorgeous. Those thin pin stripes in the background really adds a lot of interest to the card. Now that sentiment is from the Splendid Bouquet bundle from Altenew. I've used it in videos before. I like the style of it, and it fits nicely there in the middle. I did add white gel pen dots to the center of the flowers just for a bit more contrast. And there you have the idea of using a scoreboard to create lines on a vellum note card. By the way, you'll notice the envelope is a perfect match because the envelopes are from Altenew and they have them in the same color families as their cardstock and inks. Now let's go back to the other floral cluster. This time I'm creating a vellum window on the front of our card. So I have an older die set from Altenew. This is the picture frame die set. You can see it there in kind of the left middle. I'm taking the smaller of the frame dies and cutting it from the center of a piece of the Altenew Rouge Color cardstock, and that's 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. I will take the negative space of that and line it up on the front of a top folding 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. Once I have it lined up, I'll take that same frame and pop that die into the opening and use a piece of tape to hold it there. I'll run it through my die cut machine again, and this will give us a window on the front of our white note card that's in the same position as the window on that peach color cardstock. Now it's time to make a vellum window. I'll put adhesive around the front of that window on our white note card, and then I will place a piece of vellum on top of it that's slightly smaller than 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. So now we have a vellum window. Now before I add the peach window around that, I'm going to add some interest to that peach piece. I'm using my Spellbinders Better Press system, putting a little bit of temporary adhesive on the back of that peach cardstock frame, and I'll place it in the center of the clear plate on my Better Press system. I will then take the Altenew Basketweave press plate. I love this pattern, and I will place that right in the center of my Better Press system, and I'll ink it up with white pigment ink. Now the Better Press system is a newer tool, but there are so many great press plates coming out to use with it that I highly recommend it. Press plates can also be used with the Glimmer foil machine and can also be used to make an impression with any old die cut machine. So there's a lot you can do with it, and I will link to an informative video below. But today I'm using my press plate with the Better Press system. Now I didn't want to just run this through as is, so I stopped briefly so I could add the centerpiece here. Now I'm not using the centerpiece on this card, but I might as well put the impression on it and save it for another card. So I pop the clear plate on top of the platform of the Better Press, and then I run it through my Spellbinders die cut machine. This will press that plate and ink into my cardstock, leaving a small impression, but that white ink. And it's beautiful and very subtle. If I want that white ink to be more intense, I could repeat the process and it would really stand out more. But I was going for something subtle on this frame. Okay, I'll put adhesive on the back of that and place it onto the front of our note card so that the vellum is sandwiched between. And now we have a simple vellum window. I used that same frame die to cut from white cardstock. On the inside of the card, I'm gluing one of those white die cuts just to give it a nice finished look. And then on the front, I will glue together 3 white frame die cuts and glue that right onto the vellum. This gives us a little bit of dimension, and then into the center of that window, right on top of the vellum, we'll add our floral die cut. Now I'm using Gina K Connect liquid adhesive. It will show through a bit onto the vellum in the inside of the card, but I'm not too worried about it. Honestly, for me, I don't find specialty vellum adhesives to be that much better than regular adhesive, so I don't invest in it. Instead, I just use what I have, and I think it's completely fine. All right, now after that has dried, liquid adhesive does take longer to dry on vellum than regular cardstock. I can add a sentiment right across the front center. Now this sentiment is from the Altenew Chocolate Flower stamp set. This is a great stamp set that allows you to create 2 different pattern backgrounds. One is like you see here on the right, and then one is a dotted background like you see on the left. Both of these I think are really universal, can be used for a lot of things. But what I'm using today is one of the sentiments, actually 2 of the sentiments from the bottom. I'm taking one of the reverse sentiments where the background will be solid and the letters will be open. So you could stamp this with black ink and you would have a black background with white letters. What I'm choosing to do is stamp this with clear Versamark ink, which is a clear embossing ink, on white cardstock. Then I will add gold embossing powder. Now, at first I started to heat this from the front, but then I remembered when I want my embossing powder to appear a little bit smoother instead of textured, it's best to heat from the back side and melt it that way. So here I'm doing it from the front, but then I'll switch to the back side and you'll see that ends up giving a smoother result on the side where I heated from the back. It's subtle, but to some people it really is a big difference. So there's a little tip for you. I'll try to show it in the camera here. It's not very obvious in the camera, but you can see around the word love, it's much smoother than it is around the word heart. So just a little way to make your embossing smoother is to heat from the back side. Now it's time to trim this down. I wanted to trim this down so there isn't a white outline around the gold embossing. So I'm putting a Post-it note right up against the bottom edge of the gold embossing. Then I will use my trimmer to line up the blade of my trimmer where it cuts with the edge of that Post-it note. So I line it up on the top and the bottom with that pink edge and I'll cut. And then I will move the Post-it note to the top edge of the gold embossing. This is really handy trick to do with Post-it notes. I've shown this many times in videos, and this is just another example. Placing the sticky part of the Post-it note so it's lined up right there with the top edge of the gold embossing. I'll slide it under there, line up the edge of the pink Post-it note with the blade of my trimmer. I'll drop the trimmer and then we will cut right along the top edge. Then I can use the bottom edge there to cut the front and the back. And now we have that gold sentiment strip perfectly cut out. Next, I'll create a mini note card that's top folding. This is white cardstock, and the mini note card size is about 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. This will go on the inside of our note card so that we again have a place to hide our personal message that we write on the inside. I also wanted to put a little sentiment on the inside, so I'm choosing the You're a Blessing in My Life sentiment from the same chocolate flower stamp set. I'm cutting off the words in my life from the stamp so that it's a bit shorter. I can always put these mounted on an acrylic block or in my stamping tool together as they were originally intended, but by cutting it smaller, I can change up the sentiment. I've lined that up with the sentiment on the front of my card. I'll open up the card and then stamp this on the inside using crimson ink, which is the same color as the cardstock I used on the front. So this idea of cutting up stamps, I know some people get freaked out by this, but I promise it's a great way to stretch your supplies and get more from your sentiment images. I finished the card off by adding little gold gel pen dots to the flower, which really matches the gold heat embossing very nicely. And of course, I have a matching Altenew envelope, which perfectly matches the cardstock that I used on the front and the ink I used on the inside. So here is our vellum window card. This is just a really nice way to create a subtle spot for your focal point image and sentiment to rest. Here you can also see that better press white image on the peach cardstock around the edge, and how the gold heat embossing matches the gold gel pen that I used on the center of the flowers. So there is another idea for using vellum to create a very sheer window to add to the front of any card base. Okay, my last card shows how to create a very simple no bulk vellum shaker card. Now for this, I'm using some mushroom products from Altenew. I love mushrooms. This is an older one. This is the Mushroom Garden Layering Stencil Set. I love this. I haven't used it a whole lot in videos, but I've used it off screen a lot. It creates the most a colorful, fun background. Let me show you from the packaging here the kind of card that you can create. So this stencil set would work really well with the card set I'm using today. In fact, I considered inking this up on the vellum, but I was afraid it would be a little too much, but I wanted to show you that it coordinates nicely. I will be using a sentiment from the older Altenew Mushroom Greeting stamp set. This is one that I've also been wanting to use in a video for a while, and I'm glad I finally got to use it today. And I'm using it along with a new die set that's just now available called Mushroom Cottages. Look at all the little mushroom images that it creates from this one die set. Now you could create these a little more realistic looking or a little more playful looking. I'm going to go for a playful look today. So the nice thing about Altenew dies is they cluster the ones together that should be cut from the same color cardstock. So you see the die that's like in the middle right there underneath my X-Acto knife. That one cuts the front of the mushroom tops, and I cut that from red cardstock, and it cuts them for all of the mushrooms that color. It makes it really easy to figure out what pieces to cut from what color of cardstock, and there is a guide that comes with the die packaging that makes it very easy. You could keep it a little more realistic looking by not adding the doors and the windows, but I love how playful this is and that you have both options. The die set also creates these fun leaves that can be clustered around the little mushroom cottages. Now for my particular card, I'm only using some of the layered die cut images, but do know that there are others included in the set, including a bunch of different little rocks. You can make a lot of cards with this. As I mentioned, for this card, I'm making a flat vellum shaker card front. So I'm starting with the piece of vellum here that is 4 3/4 inches by 6 inches. And I'm scoring 1/4 of an inch in from each edge. So I did a 1/4 inch score line there. Then I rotated it, did a 1/4 inch score line, rotate, do another 1/4 inch score line, and then rotate one more time and do one more score line. This will allow me to fold those flaps in to create a vellum card front. In a video coming out very soon, I will show how to do this with clear acetate, but I do feel like vellum is a great shaker window option because it mutes everything down and isn't as distracting. Now I'm going to set that aside, and I have a piece of blue cardstock. This is the Caribbean Sky from Altenew, and I've trimmed that to be 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. I'm stamping this background image from the Chocolate Flowers 6x8 stamp set, and I'm stamping it with blue ink. I'll stamp it on one side, move the stamp, and stamp it on the other side. I really like how this gives the look of splatter or spatter on the back of card, but in a more controlled way. So this could be used on many different card styles. I will now place this face down onto that scored vellum piece, right in between the score lines. I put a bit of adhesive along one edge there, and then I'll put a magnet right there in the center to hold it in place so it doesn't move. I'll fold the vellum back onto that adhesive and then cut the corners so they're easy to fold the next time. I put adhesive along the other edge next to it, folded that in, cut the corners. And I'll do this on 3 sides of it, but I'll leave the top edge unfolded so I can add my shaker bits on the inside. Now I do recommend flat sequins. I'm using flat silver confetti on the inside of this. You can also do tiny little die cuts, but something flat is best for this. Once I'm happy with how much I have inside of this shaker window, I will put adhesive on the back and then fold that last vellum flap over. So now we have a shaker card front made from vellum. The vellum is nice because it kind of mutes all of those pieces in the middle. You can still see the movement, but it's not too distracting. I will then put adhesive on the back of that panel and add it to a white note card that's slightly bigger, so we have that white trim around the edge. I then added our mushroom and leaf die cuts on the front of that, along with a few gray rock die cuts at the bottom. And I stamped Love You So Much from the mushroom stamp set I showed you earlier. I also glued a few of the silver confetti scattered on the front of the vellum, which go along nicely with the silver confetti underneath the vellum. So this is a fantastic way to create a little bit of interest to your card that isn't too distracting. Again, I will have a full front shaker window video available very soon, so stay tuned for that. That background technique would also work really well with this new Altenew World in Blooms die set. I love this die set, but I ran out of time to be able to use it, so I just wanted to share it with you. It creates this fun world image along with little flowers to add to it, and that would look great on the same vellum shaker background. All right, so there you have some ideas for using vellum on your cards. I've done many videos with different ideas for using vellum, and I will link to a couple of them here at the end of this video. I also link below in my YouTube description to all the products I used if you wanted to take a closer look. I thank you for spending this time with me. Stay tuned to my next video, which has more shaker cards, and I hope this video inspires you to break out your vellum and use it in a new way. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.